So if this is your first time joining us for our monthly webinars, thank you for being here. My name is Letitia Bird, and I am joined here with my colleague, Dr. Tamra. And today's conversation is going to be focused on embedding DEI into HR policies and practices. This is our 7th monthly webinar. We started doing these in January of this year. And really the purpose of us having these monthly webinars is for us to be able to come together and provide some resources, some new learnings for all of our, not only client partners, but folks in the industry that are across a variety of HR, people, talent, DE&I roles. So if you are an HR manager, HR leader, head of people, talent, DEI manager, talent leader, whatever that may be, we have been having these conversations really around DE&I, we've done some things around metrics, around leadership accountability. But for this month and the next month, we're doing a series that is going to be about how do you embed DEI into HR. One thing that we've seen as of late is that many companies are going through some budget cuts, there are some resource constraints, and we're finding that when that happens, sometimes those DE&I teams are getting cut, which is leaving people that are in those talent HR roles to take on new DEI responsibilities that may not have that experience doing so. And so we want to give you all some really kind of easy, tangible ways you can start to embed this into the work that you are already doing. And so that's what we're going to be focused on for today. Just to share a little bit about Perfeqta and myself before I turn it over to Dr. Tamra. My name is Letitia Bird, as I mentioned, and I'm the CEO of Perfeqta. Just to tell you all a little bit about what we do at Perfeqta. Perfeqta is short, or I guess a combination of performance, equity, and talent. And so our goal and mission is to help build high-performing teams and put equity back into talent. At the end of the day, our mission is to help our client partners build equitable, inclusive, and emotionally safe workplace environments. And we don't believe the work is done until the most marginalized employee at the company feels a sense of belonging. So as you can see, there's a lot of work that we have to do. We do this through consulting, we do this through trainings. So we do help our client partners with launching DE&I councils, committees, task forces, supporting employee resource groups, creating DE&I strategic roadmaps. And we also help on the implementation side as well. We also support clients with trainings, as I mentioned. Over the last 3 years, we have trained over 8,000 professionals, which I'm really proud of. Focusing on topics around allyship, bias, privilege, microaggressions, anti-racism, and truly the list goes on, inclusive leadership as well. And so I'm really grateful to be in this space with you all today. If this is your first time joining, happy to have you. I know we have some repeat attendees. Some of you all have came every single month. Thank you so much for being here. And if you're new, I hope that you will continue to come back. Just some housekeeping rules, use the chat. If anything is resonating, let us know. If you have a question, let us know. We will be taking questions at the end, so you can use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen and drop your questions in there. But we want to make sure that we're talking with you. We're not just talking to you. We want to make sure that this is a conversation, that we're having a healthy dialogue. And I'm sure that there are things that's going well at your company, or maybe even sharing some areas of opportunity and improvement that you can share with everyone else that's here in the Zoom room. This is an opportunity for us to really learn from each other as well. So share what's working for your company, share what's not working for your company. We want to make sure that this is a really, really fruitful and engaging discussion. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Tamra.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome. If this is your first time, happy to have you. And welcome back. As Letitia noted, we got folks that come and support us every month, and we really appreciate it. We don't take for granted that this is lunchtime for maybe a few of you. And so you're taking time out of your busy day to be with us, and which is why we really hope that this is impactful for you and that you're able to take something away from it, because we want to make sure that this is a valuable use of your time being here. I'm Dr. Tamara Dias. I serve as Perfeqta's Director of External Learning Solutions, a really fancy way of saying that I partner with our clients to ensure that they have impactful learning experiences. So my background is really in education across all ages, and I really have a passion for aligning company and organizational strategy with learning opportunities for employees and teams. And so I've done this in a few ways over my career, through several experiences working in higher education, as well as 6+ years as a CEO myself, managing a team and serving about 14 to 15,000 constituents. And so really excited to talk today about DEI and HR, because I know exactly what it's like to be in the position of HR professionals. I know what it's like when you don't have resources and you want to leverage impact, you want to train people, you want your organizational goals to come to fruition. And so I've been in that position before, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. And I hope that this is a good experience for you all. So with that being said, we're going to jump right in to our conversation. As Letitia shared, the chat is open. Please talk to us. We know, if you're on West Coast time, you might just be getting your day started, but East Coast folks, we want to know you're here. We want to know you're with us. So please, chime in if something resonates with you. And we'll have times where we ask you all specific questions and invite you to share out then too. So you all probably have seen these, because likely one of these things is why you're here. You probably read one of these and said, this applies to me. I'm going through this. I've been through this. I want to be on this webinar to make sure that I get information about this. Letitia already gave a little bit of insight into us having conversations around the combination of DE&I and HR. And again, mainly we're seeing this because if you, like me, have been on LinkedIn, you're seeing companies that are restructuring, reorganizing, they're cutting departments, they're cutting different positions. And so people are scrambling, trying to figure out, how do we still pursue these DEI goals, knowing that maybe we don't have the budget we had before, or we don't have the people that we had before. So today we're going to cover 4 areas where we really find some overlap and alignment, where HR and DEI can come together. And bonus is that this is a part 1 of 2. So the goodness does not stop today. It doesn't end when this call is over, because we'll be doing a part 2 next month to continue the conversation. So I'm sorry, we see your names and we're going to kind of expect you to be back next month. We know who you are, and we hope that when you see our landing page go live, that you RSVP again. Okay, so first up, aligning DEI with your company values is where we'll start. We'll unpack what that means to create that alignment, and then give you some things to think about. If you're in an organization where maybe you haven't looked at your values in like 15, 20 years, or you haven't had any employee input on values and value statements. So we'll talk a little bit about how DEI can be integrated into those values. We'll then talk about hiring. So a huge function of HR is the recruitment and hiring process. So we'll go through some recommendations that you can use when hiring, where you can kind of automatically hire and recruit with a DEI lens. It's a great way to bring in some of those organizational goals into a direct function of HR team. Then we'll transition into how HR teams that are responsible for driving DEI can do it in a recession-proof way. So maybe you're on this webinar and you are someone who's in an HR role that has said, now DEI has been placed on my plate. Now the responsibility is on me, or whoever was in the role is no longer here. I now have to, manage some of the DEI responsibilities. Or maybe you're in an organization that is smaller, where DEI automatically falls under HR. So I know Perfeqta has had client partners where they're newer in their DEI initiatives. And so a lot of times DEI doesn't become its own function. It becomes an extension or an addition to existing human resources functions. So if that's you, if you're in either of those positions, whether it's a new addition or it's just the way y'all are starting things out, then I think, bullet point number 3 would be really helpful for you to figure out how to take this back into implementation without feeling like you need millions upon millions of dollars to see these goals through. And then our last thing we'll do is we'll wrap up how HR teams can embed DEI into any area of the employee life cycle. So of course, we'll talk about hiring, but there's also other areas within the employee life cycle that include, while they're there, employee engagement. So how are you building those relationships and connecting them to the company while they're there? And then even in offboarding, even when an employee leaves, there's still a way for you to embed DEI into that area of the life cycle. And so we'll talk about that. And that's our roadmap for today. So buckle up. We got our roadmap. We know where we're going. And let's jump right in to our first topic. I'm going to share this quote with you all because in the chat for me, give me a yes if you've ever heard someone say at any organization, doesn't have to be your current organization, but if you've ever heard anyone say that DEI is just a nice to have. So it's just something we can do on the side, or it's just a little bonus or a little luxury that we can add on. We can kind of throw it in. Okay, getting some yeses in the chat. I have heard it too. Thank you, Michael. I love the enthusiasm. Yeah, I have heard it too, where typically I see it where I'm trying to have conversations maybe around accountability or follow-up, and maybe a budget has been cut. And I'm having conversations about DE&I, and the response is, oh, well, that's nice, but DEI is just a little bonus. We don't really need it, or we don't need to talk about DE&I until we reach our sales goal, or until we reach this goal. But until then, DEI is not really necessary, or it's not a requirement. Yeah, Letitia, thank you. Or we're doing good enough, right? Like we're making it, so we're doing just fine. I wanted to share this quote from Inclusive because I think that a lot of times leaders within organizations, specifically those that maybe aren't as familiar with DE&I or may just be new on their own journey to DE&I, they'll say this. And I love this quote that says, DEI is not just a nice to have, but a critical business imperative for organizations to be able to attract and retain talent. And I share this because when you look at DEI in that way, it reminds you that it's not just a bonus for you, but every organization, every business has to hire people and they want to keep people. And so when you think about it that way, you can ask any CEO, you may say like, hey, is DEI important to you? And you might get a variety of responses. But I guarantee if you ask them, hey, is hiring top talent important to you? Is retaining our top talent important to you? They would say absolutely yes. Yes. If our numbers drop today and half of our top talent quit, we would want to know why. And so DE&I, a lot of times when companies think that it's just an addition or it's just a bonus, they miss out on being able to attract and retain talent because they're not prioritizing it. One of the things that I thought was really important is that millennials and Gen Zers are the top two generations that now when they are looking for jobs, they are looking at who's in positions and they're looking at how companies prioritize DE&I, which is why we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about hiring. Because DE&I, people are looking at you, people are looking at your company, your organization, and they're looking to see where DEI falls as a priority. And if it's not a priority, people can tell. They know immediately. And so as we start this conversation, I think it'll be important just to know that if you're in that role, you're HR, and you're thinking, I got a lot on my plate. I don't know how I'm going to do this, or this has just been, a lot of work, or I'm dealing with executive leadership that doesn't think it's a priority. Today, hopefully you'll get some tips to help you further along that conversation. So I want to share some statistics with you. The first is that more than 76% of employees and job seekers say a diverse workplace is important to them when they're choosing a job. So that goes back to my initial point around Gen Zers and millennials. And most companies, while all ages are switching jobs and applying for jobs, if your company is recruiting on college campuses, at universities, if you have an internship program for graduate students, it's likely you're entertaining the top two groups that are looking at DE&I as priorities. So when you know that automatically tells you, okay, this needs to be a conversation that HR is having. We need to be talking about this because it's going to directly impact the people that we bring on. 2% of job seekers say they wouldn't even apply to a company with a lack of diversity amongst its employees. So they're not even looking. They're gonna check your page, and if they don't see anything, they're moving on. 72%, and this was probably the most impactful one for me, is that over 70% of US workers said that they're willing to leave a job for a more diverse workplace. So if you are in a company right now that is not diverse, then you can potentially look at 7 out of 10 people and ask, if there's more diverse organizations that are in our industry, there's a chance that they would leave. And they're open to leaving simply because we don't have the diversity. And of the 72% who actually did leave their jobs for a more inclusive culture, almost 33% did so because they didn't feel comfortable being themselves. So there's something I want to point out here is that we're seeing a direct link between companies that prioritize DE&I and employee belonging and community. So it's obvious that when we look at this and we can say, for the people that looked and said, I think I want to go somewhere that's more diverse or inclusive, of that, over a third of them said, I am also leaving because I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel like I can be myself. There's a clear distinction between who I am authentically and how I have to show up at work. And so when I think about that, I think that is an automatic link to HR, because if you're in HR, you're likely doing surveys around programming that you're offering. You're asking for employee feedback. You're asking for feedback through sometimes performance conversations. And when an employee leaves, sometimes there's feedback shared there. And you want to know if a top reason that somebody is leaving your company is because they're not comfortable, they can't authentically be themselves, and they're leaving for a more diverse environment. So now we're going to transition into how you can begin to implement, or at least I won't even say implement, because I know that sometimes you're probably thinking, y'all are giving me these great ideas, but like, if I can't overhaul everything, what is one thing I can do? So when we talk about core values, if you're like, hey, this is a great webinar, but I also can't just go to the CEO and say, hey, I have 10 new core values, let's erase all the ones we have and change them. Not asking you to do that, but do want to give you some things you can think about when it comes to assessing your core values. So I want to ask you all, have you ever worked at a company where the core values did not align with the culture? So an example might be a company that says, we value transparency here. Everybody should be honest and transparent. Transparency is our top value. And then you're the last to find out about every decision. Or decisions are made behind closed doors, and then 3 months later you find out, wait, they let go a whole department and nobody knew. So that would be a place where you don't have the alignment of the values with the culture. Okay, we're getting yeses. So you all have been in places where a company says, we believe this, but then you're on the inside working there going, no, y'all don't, because I work here. And I can tell based on my experience working here that y'all didn't work here. Oh, thank you for that. Management did not walk the walk. Absolutely. So even within the culture, maybe it's not felt all across, but maybe like your direct managers, your leaders, maybe executive leadership, and starting these, town halls or monthly all hands meetings. And y'all are gathering and they're like, yes, and here's our vision and here's what we're going to do. And y'all are in the background thinking, where did that value come from? That doesn't make sense. Like, we don't do that. Simone Sloan, who works at Forbes, said, values influence what your teams believe are important and shape their action and decisions. Most importantly, they are the building blocks for an inclusive company culture. So up here, you'll see 3 things: assess, adjust, and align. And all 3 of these phases, I think, are important, regardless of what stage you're in at your company. So maybe if you didn't respond yes, like if you're thinking, I'm at an organization, or I've always been at organizations where we exemplified our core values. First of all, shout out to you. You work for a great employer, or you always have worked for great employers. But at any stage, even if you feel like your values are top notch and there is alignment, you can still assess, adjust, and then further align as you go on. So in the first stage, if you're thinking core values are where we want to start, what do we do first? The first thing you want to do is currently assess the core values. Look at where they are right now. First of all, do you know your core values? Because I know I've worked at places where we've had core values, and if you were to ask me what they were, I got nothing. I don't know what they are. I see them maybe on the website occasionally, and maybe they're in an email signature, but I don't actually know what the core values are. So you want to ask yourself, what are these values? Do people know them? And how do they actually represent the culture at the organization? So going back to that question of, okay, if we say we value transparency, how do our leaders model that? Do they model that? Have we done a recent employee engagement survey where people have said, oh, there's a culture of micromanaging here. And one of our, like, we just feel like we can't work on our own, or we feel like we can't do anything on our own without being double checked or triple checked. But one of your core values is autonomy. So maybe you're able to use that feedback and say, okay, now we need to assess, because if we're getting all this feedback that is contradicting with our values, that's telling us that our values are not adequately represented within our organization. The second thing you can do is adjust. And so when I say adjust, adjusting doesn't just include throwing away your core values and getting new ones. While that's possible, because sometimes companies may choose to rebrand or choose to kind of go through some kind of strategic planning, and they might say, we want to give up, we want to create new core values. You don't always have to do that. Look at just revising them. So maybe you add in a core value, you take one away, but you keep the rest. There's an opportunity to go a little bit deeper even and give value statements to the core values that you have. So going back to the example of transparency, if you survey your employees and you say, do you believe we have a transparent culture? Because transparency is one of our values, and 70% of them say no, then there's clearly a disconnect between either what you all are identifying as transparency and how your employees are experiencing transparency. So a lot of times your definition and my definition could be different. Your expectation and my expectation could be different. And companies will often throw around words like authenticity, transparency, trust, openness, care, diligence. Like, they'll say those words, but they don't actually align them with practice. So like, if we're saying this, what is the statement that we're going to use to back this up? So for them, transparency may mean we give surveys twice a year. We're transparent because we create a culture where you can give us feedback. But for employees, y'all may say that's not what we actually determined to be transparent. So it's really having those value statements that underscore, and if you don't have them, there's an opportunity to use those statements as a chance to refine the values. And then the last one is align. And this is a really big one. So maybe you're at a company and you feel like your core values are great. Then there's an added step here where you can check and see if these values align with your policies and procedures. What policies and procedures do you have in place that maybe clearly contradict one or all of the values that you have? So an example might be if your company says we value flexibility, but they have a very strict timeline on, if you say you're going to be at work at 9, then at 9:01, we expect you to be logged on, ready to go. Your first meeting is going to start at 9:05. Whereas other places that may say, well, flexibility here means we have a policy on flexible work. So if you need to take a call from your car, if you need to take it from a co-working space, we don't really care where you take it from as long as you're present. So it's asking your company, looking at your company policies and procedures and saying, do these values actually match up with what employees have to follow? Because at the end of the day, your policies and procedures are going to dictate the behaviors at your company. And furthermore, they dictate the consequences and rewards sometimes, or the repercussions when negative decisions are made or negative behaviors show up. And so you have to make sure that if you have policies that do not align with your values, that you assess those and you revamp them. So if values are something you want to have a conversation about or brainstorm about, consider, assess, adjust, and align as a way to ask, where is the opportunity to create a space to be more inclusive? Do we need to assess? Do we need to adjust? Or do we need to align? All right, now we're going to talk about hiring practices. And I think everybody on here probably knows that hiring is extremely important, because the hiring process tells you a lot as a candidate about what a company is doing, how they run the organization. I can think back into my career where I've not had great hiring experiences. And within the first maybe like interview or the second interview, I'm thinking, this has been a horrible process. I actually don't know that I want to work here anymore. I don't know that I want to be a part of this team, because hiring has just been a really difficult process, or maybe there wasn't follow-up, or maybe I experienced microaggressions and discrimination in an interview. And so hiring is a really good focal point for you as HR to think about, are we being inclusive? Are we being equitable? Are we approaching this from a diverse perspective? So the first thing you can do is evaluate your sourcing and include diverse recruitment channels. Perfeqta had a client partner last year that we partnered with, where we did an inclusive recruiting handbook. And one of the things that we talked about was sourcing, having conversations with them about where they were getting candidates from. Because raise your hand if you've ever heard an employer say, or leadership say, like, oh, well, nobody's an executive here because diverse candidates just don't exist. We can't find anybody who we can make our chief people officer or our chief operating officer. We opened the pool, but nobody applied. So, we give up. Like, there just must not be anybody who's interested in a senior level position, right? When in actuality, you have to ask yourself, where are we looking for candidates? Are we using diverse recruitment channels to bring people in and to have these conversations and to make sure we're hitting them? You can partner with professional organizations. I know several sororities and fraternities, historically Black sororities and fraternities, that have professional hubs where they post career opportunities and job opportunities. Great ways for companies to establish partnerships. The second is examine your interview panels. Y'all, this is such an easy lift. Look at the people who are interviewing your candidates and ask yourself, do we have a representation of diverse backgrounds? And I'm not just talking ethnicity. Ethnicity is important, but also education level. Does everybody on your interview panel have a graduate degree, or do you have a variety of perspectives? Do you have people who maybe don't speak English as a first language on your interview panel, demonstrating that you have an inclusive environment? Super important, and also really helpful, because you're also giving people across the company who might feel like, because of my role, I don't have a direct opportunity to hire, or I don't feel like I have a voice. There's an opportunity to plug them in and say, hey, we value your perspective and we really want to share, we want your insight on people who join the company. The third is that you can provide training. Specifically, here we talk about mitigating biases, because one of the things at Perfeqta, whenever we do a training here that we do on unconscious bias, we always talk about how everybody has biases. Even the person who says, I'm just and I'm fair and I try to be really equitable in everything I do, I double check and triple check. Even the person who does that still has biases. And so HR can really be a hub for training people around mitigating their biases. I know some companies that even have checklists around maybe like questions to ask yourself just to hold yourself accountable before and during interviews, to make sure that you're actually approaching it from an inclusive perspective and not allowing your biases to keep you from learning about the candidate and really knowing them for who they are. And then the fourth thing you can do is create a system of continuous improvement. Create space where, as a team, you're always evaluating what you're doing well, what's not working, and then what changes you want to make. That can be conversations. It can be feedback and surveys directly from the hiring team, maybe the interview panel. If you've just built an interview panel and maybe you brought on different individuals, ask them, so how did how was that process? Do you think you would give us any feedback? Create a system to where people are giving you feedback and to where you're listening to the feedback and figuring out where you want to make changes. Be sure that you're also asking for feedback from candidates. So asking candidates about their experience. TikTok has become a huge place for HR over the past year really. And I've seen a lot of people in HR and a lot of job candidates who will post about the hiring process. And I think across social media, one thing that I've seen is a lot of job seeking candidates talk about how stressful the hiring process was. And not just because they were looking for a job, but because a recruiter emailed them and never followed up, or they signed on for an interview and nobody was there and they never got an alert that the interview was canceled, or they discussed a part of the job description and then when they made it to the final round, whoever the person was that interviewed them said, oh no, like that's not a part of the job. They lied to you, or that's not a part of the job. We changed our mind. And so ask for feedback from your candidates. Ask them what they thought, what recommendations they have, because this is also an opportunity to change, to innovate, and to ensure that you're being inclusive. Within a team, it's easy sometimes to get caught in your own thoughts and what you think is best. So creating that space for others to share is also going to be really important.
Great. So now that we talked about hiring, let's talk a little bit about recession-proofing DEI strategies for HR. We have some recommendations here that we have proposed on this slide, but I'll just go through each of these a bit in detail. And also, I know Tamara just talked through some inclusive hiring practices. At Perfeqta, we launch free resource guides just about every quarter. And so Gabby on our team just dropped a link to download our inclusive recruitment guide. If you are looking for ways to diversify your talent pipeline, go ahead and click on that link, drop your email in there. You can get access to that. And that goes into a little bit more detail of what we just shared. So as it relates to recession-proofing DEI strategies, we recognize that there are, some financial resource constraints. And so when you do take the time to embed DEI into the work you're already doing, that is a way to make sure that you are still working towards building inclusion and equity at your company, and just adding that into the day-to-day of your work. It is very, very hard for HR and DEI to operate in silos. And so I imagine that many of you are already doing some of this work. So let's talk about a couple of tweaks and things you all can make to make sure that you do emphasize and add in some DEI into the work you're already doing. One thing we've seen in this field is that many HR professionals are responsible for either reviewing, creating, revamping existing HR policies. So take a look at your HR policies, review what you have, and make sure that they're inclusive. Make sure that they are promoting equity. For example, take a look at any accommodation, promotion policies, and look at if there are any systemic barriers that are holding historically excluded groups back from having the same opportunity. You may also want to review like your leave policies or even flexible work arrangements to be more inclusive. We have seen now with companies either operating on a hybrid, remote, or even looking at those RTO policies, that there's some work that we can do to make sure that we are being more inclusive and that we are being more equitable there. Is there also an opportunity to really increase that workplace flexibility for your employees that are taking care of others, whether that be family members, whether that be children, having more flexible policies, right? Making sure that employees are able to get the support that they need, whether they're working in the office or they're working at home. When you take a look at those leave policies as well, think about adding in mental health policies, making sure that your employees are actually aware of the mental health policies, the benefits, the things that you all provide. Because sometimes, and we have these conversations with our client partners all the time, is that HR is working. Y'all are doing the work, right? You have the employee handbook. You can go, employees can go to the intranet and they can see what benefits are available, but how many times are they doing that? So what we've seen our client partners do is they'll have events around specific holidays or days. I know mental health month was this, a couple of months ago. And so actually talking about mental health at work, but then also bringing in some of those benefits that are available and can be provided to employees. And so sometimes you all may have to kind of go on your own campaign to make sure that your employees are aware of those inclusive policies that you do have and that they're taking advantage of it. So while you are looking at your policies, also take a look at the engagement. Take a look at who's actually taking advantage of our policies. Is it how we are communicating it? Is it how we are promoting it? Are they not aware? it's not inclusive enough when we take a look at the actual representation of the employees that are taking advantage of our policies. The next one here on the list is around inclusive language. So encourage and educate employees around inclusive language by first implementing it into HR focused areas. For example, make sure you are using inclusive language that is not discriminatory or harmful, especially to individuals from marginalized or historically excluded groups. For example, using gender neutral language, being sensitive to cultural, religious, or other diversity aspects when communicating, and also being inclusive in your own communication as an HR leader. It is so important to really set the standard of how you want the rest of your employees to behave within the organization. You all can set that standard and set that example. So be willing to learn, take the time to take inclusive language, inclusive leadership, inclusive communication courses as well. And be willing to learn and correct yourself if you are unintentionally using exclusionary language. Next here is feedback. And we can't emphasize getting feedback from employees enough. So make sure that you are seeking input from employees, and you can do this through a number of ways. I know Dr. Timmer mentioned, surveys earlier, feedback sessions, focus groups, taking time to meet and talk with your employee resource groups. If you are not a part of your company's DEI council, if you have one, making sure you are getting time with them as well to really understand any experiences, concerns, and also suggestions for improvement. This can be done using free or low-cost online survey tools and by facilitating open dialogues. You want to make sure that employees feel heard, but also that there is action being put behind it. And then the last one here is around your talent. Leveraging and promoting internal talent that represents diversity in a variety of ways when you think about all the dimensions of diversity. So racial, ethnic groups, educational background, gender identity. So actively identify and nurture diverse talent within your organization for leadership positions. Going back to Dr. Tamara's point earlier, something that we have heard from leaders as well, and I know a couple of years ago, the CEO of Wells Fargo came under fire for saying that there is no diverse talent in leadership roles because we didn't exist, right? We weren't out there. That is not true. But I have had the opportunity to sit down with CEOs that have said that that is a challenge for them. And what companies fail to do at times is to not look at the talent they have within their organization. So if there are ways to make sure that you are intentionally and proactively developing the diverse talent within your organization, thinking about the leadership pipeline, right? Thinking about those retention strategies specifically for these groups, then you won't have to go out and try to search externally because you are taking the time to develop your talent within the organization. So next, we're going to talk about DEI and the employee life cycle. I know that most of you all on here, if you are an HR professional, you are very familiar with the employee life cycle. And I am sure as you're looking at this slide, you are probably doing work in each of these areas and working on a few different initiatives and projects in each. The great thing about this is that having an employee life cycle that you're working through in those projects and initiatives is great. I want to give you some ways to think about incorporating DE&I into this work and into these areas. The first one here you see is onboarding. This is a great opportunity to make sure that new hires understand expectations, getting their feedback along the way, making sure that when your employees are joining your company, that they are very aware and familiar with your company's DE&I practices, policies, initiatives. We have seen with some of our client partners in the past when we've done focus groups that employees didn't even know which ERGs existed at the company until they were 6 months in. How can you bring your ERGs into your onboarding process? You want to make sure that if you want to increase that sense of belonging for new hires, that you are showing them what safe communities do exist from them when they are first joining the company. On this slide here, you see that we say create a 30, 60, 90-day check-in process for new hires and their managers to create a smooth transition. This is something that we do at Perfeqta, and it has been very helpful. It's helpful to make sure that we are clear on expectations on both ends, to make sure that our new hires are aware of their role, make sure that the expectations are clarified, and if we need to do some resetting, if there are some changes that need to be made, we're able to do that. Maybe there's a little bit more support that they need. Or maybe there's just more touch points that they need. You never know what someone needs until you actually sit down and have these conversations with them. And sometimes waiting 6 months in to say, hey, how's it going? It might be a little too late. The more you can focus on having a robust onboarding process, that will, in return, increase that employee's retention with your organization. And during the 30, 60, 90-day check-in, you could ask questions like, is this role what you thought it would be? Are you clear on the expectations of your role? What resources can be provided? How are things working? How are things not working? Is there anyone at the company that you would like to build a better relationship with? How do you like to be managed? How do you like to receive feedback, right? And this is where really having conversations with your people managers and making sure they're trained on receiving feedback is important, so that they can make sure that their teams feel supported during that time and during that transition. The next is the employee experience. So at Perfeqta, we love partnering with companies in this area. So while we recommend to have at least quarterly or even bi-monthly trainings to keep employees engaged, don't let this stop you from starting. If you can at least plan 1 to 2 trainings a year, that can give you a solid start to DEI work at your company. Or you can also think about training a specific subset of people, right? For some of our client partners, we focus specifically on people managers, right? Because HR recognizes that that is where we need to get the most support in ASAP, because that's going to trickle down to how their employees and their direct reports are being treated at the company. So if those resources are limited, can you start with a smaller group and then over time expand the training offerings that you're providing? The next is talent management. So when was the last time you've actually looked at your performance management process and look for areas where there may be inconsistency? So for example, you want to be sure that personality is not being leveraged as a measure. Studies show that women are more so judged on personality, whereas men are more so judged on performance. So you want to make sure that you are taking that bias out of the feedback process altogether. That may look like providing some training and resources to those managers that are filling out those performance reviews, reviewing some of those, and ensuring that there is no bias in there. The next is rewards. So rewards and recognition is a big one. Rewarding employees for being inclusive is a great incentive. And also it helps to hold people accountable. So what is focused on and amplified has the opportunity to grow. And if you want to grow in this area, be sure to focus on it. Sometimes your rewards and recognition things don't have to be compensation. It could be doing a shout out. It could be verbal recognition. It could be a small gift, but employees should be rewarded when they are being inclusive. Reward your managers and your people on inclusive and equitable behaviors. So that does become something that is recognized and other employees see that is something that is important to the company. And then the last one here is on exit interviews. Exit interviews are a great opportunity to get some insight into an employee's experience and also understand maybe why that employee is leaving. Maybe it was a lack of company's DEI initiatives or lack of commitment. Perhaps they didn't feel a sense of belonging. When employees are out the door, they will feel more compelled to give you some real feedback. It may be hard to hear, but it will be helpful. I was talking to a CEO of an accounting firm a few months ago, and in 2020, he took the time to go through exit interview feedback because he wanted to hear and learn firsthand what they could be doing to build a more inclusive workplace. And through that, he was able to learn about experiences that he was not going through personally as a white man, but it allowed him to build more empathy and to see there are some areas within our D&I strategies that we need to focus on and do a better job of. So my question for you all, now that we've gotten through all of these, and of course, there's so much more we can say here, but we wanted to keep it pretty succinct for you all. Does your HR team currently do any of these, or would you like to try any of these? Just let us know in the chat here. More on DEI and hiring, please. Oh, yeah. And if you have any questions, go ahead and drop those questions in the chat. We can talk about hiring all day long. So drop those questions in the Q&A. And Michael says, reviewing your benefits to see if they support historically marginalized employees. Absolutely. Definitely want to incorporate more DEI into the retention and exit phases of employee life cycle. We hold a DEI session for all new hires. Something that we've seen our client partners do is do like a quarterly DEI town hall, or those monthly new hire sessions as well. If you are working on DEI strategies behind the scenes and the rest of your employees aren't aware, what are you doing the work for? Isn't it there to support them and impact them? So make sure you're bringing your employees into the journey. So figuring out what that communication loop looks like, whether that's a town hall, whether that's a newsletter, employees will show up. So needing more focus in talent bias training, baseline trainings are a great idea. We do collect information from individuals that are leaving. Love that. Thanks for sharing. So as we wrap up, and we do have time for questions, so make sure you're using that Q&A function and drop your question in the Q&A. Drop your question in Q&A. So I want to highlight a few key takeaways from our time together here. What I'm hearing you all say is that you all are already doing the work, but you are recognizing that there are some things that you can do to go ahead and emphasize on DEI a bit more. But our key takeaways is know that more new hires are looking for companies that demonstrate a long-term commitment to DE&I. That is a big, big priority and a non-negotiable for many job seekers. So this is an opportunity for HR to amplify that work. Company values speak to the culture of your organization. So make sure that within your company values, you are able to ensure that they are inclusive. The hiring process can be used to engage diverse perspectives. So make sure you emphasize DEI in hiring. Companies never stop hiring. You might be on a hiring freeze today, that could change tomorrow. So start, even if you have 50 roles to just 1 or 2 open roles, start with what you have. And regardless of your budget, you can choose 1 to 2 areas within the employee life cycle to create opportunities to integrate DEI. So thank you all so much. We're going to go ahead and open it up for some questions, but I want to just say that let's walk away with a collective understanding that you can start with what you have now. You can start today. You can start in your role to really make an impact. We have time for about 3 questions. And if you are interested in learning more or working with us at Perfeqta, I'll drop our email and our contact form in the chat. We want to hear from you. Let's set up some free time to get together, learn more about some of your challenges, learn more about your needs, learn more about your goals, and figure out how we can come in and support you all. So we do welcome that. And Tamara, if you can go to the next slide, I just want to show everyone our info here. So our email is info@goperfecta.com. We are taking on new clients for Q3. So starting in August, starting in September, we are taking on clients for training, consulting, advising if you need support with your ERGs, your diversity councils. If you need help getting started, then please let us know. All right. With that being said, we are going to take a couple of questions here. And Tamara, I will turn this question over to you from Jennifer. Do you have any examples of how to create meaningful recognition when you don't have the budget to give out monetary recognition?
Thank you. That's a great question. Yes. So there was actually a survey done where a while ago where employees were asked to acknowledge moments of recognition, or like when they remember in their career kind of being acknowledged for doing great work. And a lot of them pointed out straightforward just recognition, mainly from their managers. So a direct manager, supervisor saying, hey, I really want to commend you. And this, an example of this might be I noticed that you used inclusive language, or I noticed that you were really intentional about asking pronouns before you started the meeting. And so I just want to commend you on that. The second is executive leadership recognition. So moving up a couple levels and being able to highlight from like a C-suite executive of, wow, Jasmine in our marketing department, I've been told that she's reviewed all of our collateral materials and made sure that they had inclusive language. I really just want to take a moment and commend Jasmine. Jasmine is directly managed by our director of marketing. And, she shared with me how impactful Jasmine's work was. So also looking up the channel as an opportunity for recognition. The third, and I've done this personally, is offering, in addition to kind of verbal recognition, offering LinkedIn references or reviews as an opportunity for recognition, or LinkedIn shout outs. So if your company or HR team has a LinkedIn page highlighting, a year ago, our company set this really big strategic goal to be a more inclusive workspace. And we want to commend Joshua on the communications team for his work in leveraging our new report, for impact. So ensuring too that like, even if it's done verbally, you can also underscore that on your website, LinkedIn, and then of course in performance reviews. So a lot of times people can really be humble about themselves in performance reviews, and it takes a really good leader or manager to call out great work that they've done and to say, I noticed you didn't put this on your review, but I want to highlight it because you did amazing work. And I want to make sure that this is in your documentation. So those are just some recommendations that you can do that don't really cost money, and that across levels people can implement.
Thank you. Great question, Jennifer. And the next question, and this will be our last question looking at our time here, is how do you get HR staff to think about DEI work when their work is so granular? For example, many of our HR staff solely focus on payroll, onboarding, etc., for very technical things, and DEI is so big picture for them and isn't part of their day-to-day. One thing I will say with that is, when it comes to getting folks on board for DE&I, it will likely need to start with having some type of planning meeting, having a conversation with your leadership on how can we get our HR teams more engaged in understanding the work of DEI, right? And so having some team meetings to start bringing in DEI, the dialogue of DEI, the benefits of it, why it's important, is going to be key, right? Instead of just jumping into, hey, you're responsible for this, you got to make sure you focus on this new DEI thing, right? We do have to make sure with DEI, and I think it's one of the few functions that we're constantly having to get buy-in over and over again, is that you will likely need to have regular meetings. Even if you do have a team meeting, adding in a DEI segment where you're just talking about it, right? And starting to get that buy-in to the point where people are comfortable speaking to it, and that they are also sharing their own learnings. It is a gradual journey. Everyone's level of buy-in will look different, but if you make it a consistent part of your conversations and your team culture, I'm sure that your team will hopefully start to then figure out ways to really embed it into their day-to-day. With that being said, I want to say thank you all so much for being here, for joining. We're going to be doing a part 2. We're bringing in a guest speaker as well, who is an HR consultant, and she's led several HR initiatives with other organizations. So we're very excited to have her join us next month. And with that being said, have a great rest of your week. We can't wait to see you all next time. Thank you.